A few weeks ago, I found myself watching the 1993 talking animal Disney film, Homeward Bound, The Incredible Journey. I'm not sure why exactly. After just a few minutes though, the story of three brave pets embarking on a dangerous trek to get back home to their owners had me completely hooked. I was all in. If you haven't seen it in a while, or in fact have never seen it, Homeward Bound, featuring the vocal talents of the likes of Michael J. Fox and Sally Field, as the 100% real animal stars, packs an undeniable emotional punch. Having loved it as a kid, I was thoroughly engrossed again 30 years on from its release. And I found the adult version of me thinking how beautifully shot the film was, as well as being fascinated by exactly how they got these animals to perform like they did. It also got me thinking, there were a lot of live action talking animal films back in the day, and the talking baby movie trend had its day in the sun as well. More recently, I got around to seeing the first trailer for Mufasa, The Lion King, the upcoming prequel to the 2019 photorealistic CGI remake of one of Disney's most beloved films. Watching the huge-scale Mufasa trailer and the much more lo-fi Homeward Bound in close succession reinforced just how much the talking animal movie subgenre has changed over the decades. But as technology has drastically increased the tools at filmmakers' disposal, has something also been lost along the way? Did the real peak of talking animal and baby films actually happen a generation or two ago? Can anything stop the seemingly unrelenting slate of CGI-powered modern-day remakes? And how did they get those animals to do that in Homeward Bound? Well, come along on the journey to discover the answers to these and other questions as we explore the story of an often undervalued, but equally as often profitable area of movie history.
Joining us from Los Angeles are the stars, a golden retriever named Ben, a Himalayan cat named Tiki, an American bulldog named Bee, and their trainer, Tammy Maples. Good morning.
Homeward Bound was far from the first instance of pets, strays and wildlife being featured prominently in Hollywood. In fact, that film itself was a remake and adaptation. The 1963 film The Incredible Journey doesn't feature any talking pets, but it definitely exists and is based on a 1961 book of the same name. Animals as film stars is a concept which goes back almost as far as the birth of cinema itself. Rin Tin Tin, a German shepherd rescued during World War I, became a bankable Hollywood name in the 1920s and 30s and was largely responsible for establishing Warner Bros. As a major player in the early studio system. Rumour has it that Rin Tin Tin was voted Best Actor at the first ever Oscars in 1929, but the Academy vetoed it for fear of seeming like a bit of a joke. Though not the biggest mistake we've ever seen at the Oscars, this might well make it to the top 5. Rin Tin Tin should have been allowed an acceptance speech. Audiences became accustomed to seeing animals on screen in the coming decades, with the Rin Tin Tin character being played by various different dogs, and the movie Lassie Come Home and subsequent TV series proving massive hits. Not much talking in that lot admittedly, but there were soon examples of it breaking through on both the big and the small screen. Francis the Talking Mule became a movie star after the release of 1950's Francis. And if you think Hollywood's run out of ideas now, maybe it's always been this way. Francis starred in 6 more films over the next 6 years, finishing with Francis in the Navy and Francis in the Haunted House. Over on television, Mr. Ed the Talking Horse became a breakout star as well.
Market drops 5 points. I'm glad my money's tied up in hay.
On the big screen, talking animals had long become the superstars of animation, largely thanks to Disney. But in the live action world, things were still patchy. The first Dr. Dolittle film in 1967 offered up a whole host of animals, including a talking parrot called Polynesia, but the film was a financial and critical failure. In the 1970s, A Boy and His Dog featured a telepathic canine, and there were the likes of 1973's Day of the Dolphin, which saw George C. Scott train dolphins to speak English before they are kidnapped by a shadowy corporation to assassinate the president by blowing up his boat. I am not making this up. There were also, of course, the first Planet of the Apes movies, but I'm almost certain these starred humans in ape suits. In the 1980s, there were some mad talking animal capers. There was Hot to Trot, which featured Bobcat Goldthwait, and a horse voiced by John Candy that gives him investment advice. Though I am fond of this film, it was not a success at the time. There are also, of course, horse singers in The Three Amigos. Animal-led hits such as Turner and Hooch arrived on the scene, but Hooch didn't communicate with words. Neither did Budweiser's TV ad party animal mascot Spuds MacKenzie, and Howard the Duck might not have been such a monumental disaster if it had starred a real-life duck. On TV in the early 90s, we could hear the thoughts of the likes of the jive-talking dog Tequila in Tequila and Bonetti.
You woke me! In the middle of a pack of hot poodles, you woke me!
What the hell are you doing in my bed?
And Beethoven's speechless but charming drool delivered over $147 million at the box office for Universal in 1992. But it's fair to say that a serious attempt at turning real, live-action talking animals into genuine players in the modern Hollywood age hadn't really been made. Yet. Homeward Bound would soon attempt to change all that. Sorry, stuck in an early 90s TV there for a second. Anyway, Homeward Bound would soon attempt to change all that. It might look quaint in the present day, but at the time, this film was breaking new ground, and it was going to do it humanely. A black mark on the film industry's history of employing real-life animals had been the at the very best patchy history of animal welfare on set. The 1986 Japanese film The Adventures of Milo and Otis, which saw an English language version released a few years later with a voiceover from Dudley Moore, had been a particularly contentious example. I've googled it so you don't have to. But Homeward Bound's producers seek to receive the approval of the American Humane Society as a matter of priority. Which is probably a huge relief to hear if you love this movie, as it was for me. The film began production in early 1991, a full 2 years before it would be released. Director Dwayne Dunham had been working in Hollywood for more than a decade, largely as an editor, being involved in all 3 original Star Wars films and becoming the lead editor for Return of the Jedi. Searching for his own first film as a director, Homeward Bound might not have seemed an obvious choice or an easy one given the level of animal work required, but Dunham fell in love with the screenplay. The story of Homeward Bound revolves around 2 dogs, Shadow and Chance, and a cat, Sassy, each a pet of the 3 children of the Bunford family. When their mother Laura marries Bob Seaver, making them the Bunford Seaver family, the humans of the group have to move to San Francisco on a short-term basis for Bob's work. The animals remain on a friend's ranch, but through a series of very unfortunate events, they believe they've been abandoned. Shadow refuses to believe their owners would leave them out of choice, so they embark on a journey to attempt to return home. Along the way, lessons are learned, obstacles are overcome, and the film delivers an ending which I would bet my house is impossible to watch without tearing up at least a little bit. Though Dunham loved the script, as did producer Jeffrey Chernoff, they also realised that delivering a film like this was massively ambitious. Producer Chernoff has stated in interviews, without the animal trainers' tireless efforts, there quite literally would not be a film, especially when the pet stars were going to be carrying large parts of the emotional core of the movie. This required an innovative approach. To ensure that the animals were treated well and that filming could roll along at a decent pace, the production employed numerous replacement actors for Shadow, Chance and Sassy.
so that the animals are not overworked. Each has several doubles that are painted with makeup to look exactly like the lead animal. This allows filming to continue, while the stars take a rest.
Headed up by trainers Joe Camp and Tammy Maples, the team responsible for getting those animals to actually perform realised that a connection between the humans and the animals was vital. So prior to filming starting, the people and creature stars spent time together to ensure they had a natural bond on screen. Even then, the golden rule of Hollywood has long been to never work with animals and children, and Homeward Bound was attempting to do both. When it came to some of the more intricate work needed as the animals continued their attempted journey home, it took considerable planning. Though it looks perilous in the film, Shadow the golden retriever being stuck in a pit he can't escape was actually achieved by digging out a far smaller pit that the dog could physically have got out of themselves, with trainers above and below helping to achieve the appearance that he was unable to escape. When Shadow appears to break wooden boards and fall down a hole, this never actually happened. The real dog dropped to a platform immediately below, and a fake dog was shown doing the falling on screen. Much of the interaction between opposing species was achieved by different filming schedules for the animals and two trainers calling them to either side. Consideration for the animals was even at the forefront of the lighter moments. Chance the bulldog shooting Sassy up in the air with a seesaw was created from numerous shots and angles being stitched together, with the cat never less than a couple of feet off the ground. In an early scene, Chance devours the cake at the Bumford-Seaver wedding in front of all the guests. Rather than just filming the dog eat as much of the cake as he fancied, most of the cake remnants were placed on him prior to filming starting. There were just so many examples of care being taken whilst a cohesive film was still able to be created. Being an experienced editor helped Dunham in post-production, as considerable stitching together of disparate scenes was required. He would reportedly often spend 20 minutes on a single shot just to get the right look from the animal to convey the emotion required. As producer Chernov tells it, "We had to have a lot of patience. This was groundbreaking stuff. No one had done this before. Certainly, shortly after someone got the idea to put lips on animals and have them speak, but before that, it was a huge challenge." In the end, despite a new standard for care in animal-based live-action films, Homeward Bound's filming schedule was completed in just 2 months, wrapping in October 1991. The choices of the lead voiceover actors would also be key, and it's fair to say they nailed this element. Michael J. Fox as the young rebellious Chance, Sally Field as the pampered Sassy, and Don Amici, in one of his final ever roles as the wise, loving Shadow, deliver a gravitas pretty much unheard of for a talking animal film at the time. This was a kids' movie technically, or certainly Disney saw it as such, and a lot of the humour is aimed at under 16s, but the artistry and skill on show in the production really ended up elevating it to far more than that. And that ending. With the finished movie ready to hit cinemas in early 1993, Hollywood's newest stars even hit the press circuit to hype up their debut.
Good morning, Harry.
I'm sorry, I just love this picture. These guys look great.
Oh, thank you.
Homeward Bound was released in cinemas on February the 3rd, 1993. On the day it hit the big screen, at your local multiplex, you could also get a ticket for Groundhog Day, A Few Good Men, Scent of a Woman, Malcolm X, The Muppet Christmas Carol, and Aladdin. Oh, and of course, National Lampoon's Loaded Weapon 1. Truly a glorious time to be a film fan. Reviews were almost universally positive, calling it a vast improvement on the original, and that rare family film that really ought to please the entire family. Even Siskel and Ebert, who in my experience so far on this channel tend to tear apart the kind of movies I'm interested in covering, agreed that Disney were onto a winner.
Homeward Bound does live up to those overused phrases, heartwarming, heart-tugging, and it works because of the joy in the voices of the animals, and because the animals are cute, very cute. In fact, if you don't have a pet cat or a pet dog before you see this movie, beware, because your kids are going to be requesting one in earnest after they see this most enjoyable film.
I liked it too.
What I didn't tell him is that I was a little choked up too. I didn't
really?
have the gut.
Well, that's really
well,
hard.
you'd throw me against
that
the
is
wall.
heart-touching and heart-tugging. It really is.
The movie became a decent success rather than an immense blockbuster on the big screen, grossing more than $57 million, but it achieved a considerable second life on video, where it became the 5th biggest selling VHS of the entire year of 1993, behind only Aladdin, Pinocchio, Beauty and the Beast, and Barney the Dinosaur. It was essentially never not on TV in the decades that followed too. It's one of the most Disney live-action films ever made, and it certainly could be described as cheesy at points, but as a love letter to the relationship between pets and owners, it's fair to say this might be the most effective example in cinema history. A few years before Homeward Bound was busy legitimising the live-action talking animal movie, a little thought-of film had, seemingly from out of nowhere, made talking babies a genuine powerhouse offering in Hollywood. Look Who's Talking was spawned as an idea when director Amy Heckerling gave birth in the mid-1980s. Heckerling and her then husband Neil Israel would make up lines that the baby in front of them might be saying, and decided it would be a great idea for a movie. Not everyone agreed, but Heckerling persevered with the idea, and the success she'd managed to have with the likes of Fast Times at Ridgemont High and National Lampoon's European Vacation gave her some cachet to make it a reality. Even then, the budget of $7.5 million was pretty measly, and the film stars John Travolta, who was in the middle of a very low point in his career, and Kirstie Alley, who had been a star in Cheers but struggled to get too far replicating her TV success at the movies, weren't exactly the most coveted at the time. But Heckerling also had a talking baby, voiced by Bruce Willis. Sometimes you don't need anything more.
Now let me get this straight. I start crying, and she comes in with a bottle. Crying. Well, I can definitely handle crying.
Look Who's Talking was released on October 13th, 1989. Critics didn't mind it, but the film instantly became a smash hit with audiences. Hitting #1 and staying there for 5 weeks, the film ended up grossing $140 million in North America and even more in international markets for a total cinema haul of $296 million. It's fair to say that Heckerling's intuition was correct. This was a genuine blockbuster and the 4th highest grossing film of 1989. Watching it back today, even though it hasn't aged half as well as something like Homeward Bound, it's clear to see why the film became such a success. The script is okay, but the two leads play their roles perfectly, and Willis gives it his all as the voice of Mikey. It's just such an easy watch. The novelty of seeing young kids dubbed with the thoughts of adult actors was something which had never really been seen on the big screen before, and in turn Look Who's Talking became the viral hit of its day. It also lent itself incredibly well to the home video and TV markets, which added considerable secondary revenue to the pie. Completely unsurprisingly, TriStar Pictures quickly wanted a sequel, and it arrived just a year later in the form of Look Who's Talking 2. A slightly older Mikey, still voiced by Willis, is joined by a younger sister, played by Roseanne Barr. Yes, Roseanne Barr. It was the early 90s, and Roseanne, her eponymous sitcom, was pretty massive, even though her performance ended up being nominated for a Razzie Award. Look Who's Talking 2 was savaged by critics, who called it utterly undistinguished product and an embarrassingly bad 81 minutes. The movie made over $120 million, which, though a considerable drop-off from Part 1, was still enough to keep the Hollywood bean counters happy. A third film from the series, Look Who's Talking Now, limped onto screens in November 1993 and combined the somewhat older children with a pair of speaking canines, Homeward Bound style, somewhat unbelievably voiced by Danny DeVito and Diane Keaton. Look Who's Talking Now currently has a 0% score on Rotten Tomatoes. On a $22 million budget, the movie made just over $10 million at the box office. Combined with the cancellation of the short-lived TV show Baby Talk, which took inspiration and ideas from the Look Who's Talking franchise, By the end of 1993, the short-lived talking baby and toddler trend seemed to be on its way out not long after it had arrived. Even if the talking baby movie had seemingly run its course, at least for now, Homeward Bound had alerted studios to the potentially lucrative world of speaking animals, and Hollywood was off to the races. I mean, by 1995, we had seen the release of not one but two talking pig movies. One became an unmitigated success, and the other, well, yeah. The successful one, Babe, was based on Dick King Smith's 1983 book The Sheep Pig, and told the story of a young pig whose dream was to do the work of a sheepdog on the Hoggett farm. The film was directed by Chris Noonan and produced by George Miller. Yes, the same George Miller behind the entire Mad Max franchise, and employed a more advanced technique than Homeward Bound just a couple of years earlier, including tools which allow for the appearance of the animal's mouths to move, using a combination of real-life animals and animatronic ones to tell its story. Babe's star was a breed of pig which grows especially fast, so they ended up using 46 different real pigs to play the lead. Much like Homeward Bound, when Babe was released in August 1995, it was hailed as something of a triumph. Although where the pets walked, the sheep pig ran. Babe made more than $254 million in cinemas alone and was received rapturously by critics, even getting nominated for numerous Oscars, including Best Director and Best Picture. Yes, a talking pig movie nominated for the Best Picture Academy Award, and it was fully deserved. Gordy, the other talking pig film that nobody remembers, was essentially an unmitigated disaster as a movie and failed to even make back its low $6 million budget. So, you know, swings and roundabouts, I guess. Unsurprisingly, both Babe and Homeward Bound had sequels. Homeward Bound 2, Lost in San Francisco, landed in 1996, reuniting most of the original cast, but with Dwayne Dunham no longer directing. He was replaced by future Final Destination 2 and Snakes on a Plane maker, David Ellis. In the sequel, Shadow, Chance and Sassy get confused at the start of a planned family trip to Canada, end up running away from the airport and find themselves lost in San Francisco. As they make their journey home, they encounter a whole host of new animal cast members and a pair of dog nappers. Chance even has a romantic subplot. The whole thing is fine, but doesn't pack anywhere near the same emotional punch as the first film. Reviews were middling, box office was alright, but the moment for Homeward Bound had passed. This was an unnecessary sequel. Babe, Pig in the City, which sees the sheep pig head to an unnamed metropolis to help save his farm, made its debut in 1998. With George Miller going from producer to director, the sequel became a much darker reimagining of the story. As a singular piece of cinema, it holds up amazingly well to this day, and was undervalued by many critics at the time. I view it as the return to Oz of the talking animal movie subgenre, a follow-up film that totally spins your perspective of the story on its head, and which was maybe too daring for its own good to be successful on first release. But whatever my thoughts almost 3 decades on, at the time it was seen as a major disappointment. It was a financial bomb, grossing well under its production budget in cinemas, and the Babe phenomenon was, whatever the quality of the movies, over for good. When Miller discussed his work on the Babe films recently, he articulated the battle between art and commerce that this subgenre of movie often faced. The first thing that struck me when I read the book was that it was very clearly a hero's journey. Babe is the agent of change. He relinquishes self-interest for the greater good. But when I said this, people looked at me like I was crazy. They said, "But George, it's a talking pig." Towards the end of the 20th century, the talking baby movie had attempted an ill-fated comeback. Released in 1999, Baby Geniuses, with a plot based around hyper-intelligent babies, and Kathleen Turner and Christopher Lloyd attempting world domination, employed legitimately groundbreaking technology at the time, with CGI mouth morphing, giving the appearance that the babies in the movie were legitimately talking. Similar tools had appeared on animals, of course, but for humans, this was new stuff. Technological innovations aside, however, critics agreed that Baby Geniuses was terrible, but the film made a profit, so a sequel, Super Babies, Baby Geniuses 2, made its way into the world 5 years later. Far worse than the original, Baby Geniuses 2 was a truly mind-meltingly awful movie, a complete flop, and has since generally been considered within the discussion for the worst film ever made. Talking babies in animation have continued to be a continual presence over the decades, but for live action movies, their moment in the sun was brief. Look Who's Talking did it pretty comprehensively, and Baby Geniuses put the flame out. Human offspring couldn't really compete with the variety on offer from the entire animal kingdom. With live-action talking baby movies seemingly consigned to the 5 movies on 1 DVD bargain bucket of history, Hollywood had decided that the talking animal movies still had legs. In hindsight, however, Babe and Homeward Bound were the creative peak of this era of the subgenre. Though the tech continued to improve, most of what followed wasn't aiming to hit the heights seen by either the Sheep Pig movie or the Pet's Journey Home. There were outliers, of course. In 1999, Stuart Little employed some live-action animals, although the main mouse star, also voiced by Michael J. Fox, was computer-generated. Perhaps demonstrating the cost of delivering good CGI at the time, the movie cost over $100 million to make, which felt like an incredible amount of money. With big risks come big rewards though. Stuart Little was well received by critics and audiences and surpassed $300 million at the worldwide box office. In the 2000s, Charlotte's Web, based on the classic children's book, arrived on the big screen. Taking advantage of ever-increasing technological development, Charlotte's Web wouldn't have been possible without CGI, but equally leaned on a considerable use of trained animals. At a cost of $85 million, the tech didn't come cheap, and the box office haul ended up disappointing. Whatever the film's business performance, it's a quality piece of work though, and through its extensive use of real animals, it's a worthy heir to the lineage of Homeward Bound and Babe. The updated Dr. Dolittle, starring Eddie Murphy and a huge variety of different animals, made almost $300 million for Fox in 1998. Though it was a fun enough movie, this became the template for the level of seriousness afforded to talking animal films going forward. Cats and Dogs in 2001 had leaned into its ridiculous premise of a high-tech war being waged between the two species and also gone for all-out comedy. Employing a mixture of real animals, computer effects and puppetry, critics didn't hate it, the movie made over $200 million and it became a franchise with 2 sequels. In the main though, things got pretty rough. The truly horrendous live-action Garfield films, featuring a fully CGI lasagna-loving star in the real world, represented some of the worst traits of Hollywood's use of technology. The same goes for those god-awful Alvin and the Chipmunks movies, which began in 2007 and have extended to a series of insanely profitable sequels with titles like The Squeakquel and Chipwrecked. And they have made serious bank. Across 4 movies, the Alvin and the Chipmunks franchise has grossed close to $1.4 billion in cinemas alone. Beverly Hills Chihuahua, starring real animals with computer-rendered mouths, aimed for all-out laughs and more often than not missed in 2008. But the film made money, over $150 million in cinemas, so it has spawned a pair of straight-to-DVD sequels. In the 2010s we got Furry Vengeance, Zookeeper, the Yogi Bear movie. They used various percentages of real animals and CGI, different amounts of speech from the animal stars, some made a bit of money, but very little of it left any sort of lasting impression. Occasional bits of true quality did still persevere in the age of CGI dominance. Paddington and especially Paddington 2 were magnificent. 2017's A Dog's Purpose and its 2019 sequel A Dog's Journey, featuring Dennis Quaid and the voice of Josh Gad as the thoughts of a variety of different and real canines, brought back the tone and lo-fi style of Homeward Bound without the use of fake mouths, and achieved over $280 million combined at the box office. A much discussed TMZ-led controversy blew up prior to the first film's release though, bringing the animal safety and Hollywood conversation back to the forefront, when a video seeming to show animal abuse on set appeared on the site. An independent investigation by the American Humane Organization found no instances of cruelty on set, and even concluded that the video had been edited to deliberately mislead viewers, with Quaid and others quick to say that they saw no animal abuse whatsoever. Quite the contrary, the dogs were all treated very well, but it's difficult to fully shake stories like this once they appear. For some, the controversy threw up a couple of questions. 1. Can we get rid of TMZ once and for all please? And 2. When we can essentially do whatever we like with CGI, do we even need to use real animals in movies anymore? The natural conclusion of CGI dominance in the talking animal movie subgenre came when Disney decided to really ratchet up their live-action remakes in the 2010s. When they had first remade The Jungle Book as a live-action film in the 1990s, the animals didn't talk, but by the time they were able to make a mega-budget version in 2016, the completely computer-animated natural world stars were all voiced. The reimagined Jungle Book was filmed entirely on a Hollywood soundstage, with technology advancing so far that an incredibly detailed and realistic jungle world could be created without the need for on-location shoots. A legitimately groundbreaking piece of work. In the wake of the likes of Avatar and Gravity, The Jungle Book still used a real-life human boy, played by Neil Sefi, at the centre of the movie, and critics loved the movie. In a time when audiences were becoming generally more and more cynical to Hollywood's endless retreads and sequels, The Jungle Book was a pleasant surprise for sure. Not perfect, but genuinely engaging and a real technical achievement. When the film blew up at the box office, earning almost $1 billion and outperforming projections, in the wake of a slew of successful Disney live-action remakes using various levels of CGI, Jungle Book director Jon Favreau was hastily announced as the man who would now be bringing The Lion King to the real world as well, as opposed to his Jungle Book reimagining, which took influence from a variety of sources and cinematic influences to create something genuinely new. With a human star at its core, the 2019 Lion King became a far more loyal retelling of its source material, though Favreau and others were quick to state that this would not just be a shot-for-shot remake. When the film actually arrived, it really did feel like a pointless exercise, driven by an appetite for profit. The advancing computer effects, which Favreau stated had been used to some extent in The Jungle Book, but would be developing this process further for The Lion King, are objectively impressive. No doubt about it, but watching the 2019 Lion King, I was struck by just how shallow and pointless the whole exercise felt. The scale of the thing was quite something, but as a full film with an emotional core being required, the CGI animal stars couldn't quite carry it alone. I ended up just wishing I'd watched the 1994 animated version instead. Critical response was, perhaps unsurprisingly, all over the shop. Some called it joyless, artless, and little more than a glorified tech demo. A few loved it, but most were somewhere in the middle, seeing it as not terrible, but still a futile and perhaps cynical exercise in profiteering over art. 2019's Lion King was a massive hit though, taking over $1.6 billion at the worldwide box office, with $580 million of that pure profit. So whatever my thoughts on it, this new way of doing things wasn't going anywhere. The trend of photorealistic CGI delivering uninspiring on-screen results is definitely not just a Disney thing, of course, and that has rung true in talking animal movies as well. The third big screen adaptation of Dr. Dolittle, this time just called Dolittle, which arrived in 2020, starring a badly Welsh accented Robert Downey Jr., and a menagerie of computer-generated animal castmates was a disaster from the off. Suffering extensive rewrites and reshoots prior to release, you could have had the funniest script of the decade, but for me, this was never going to work thanks to the overcooked visuals. The CGI animals and overall look of the film just felt weirdly uncomfortable. As it was, the movie made $250 million, but would have needed to almost double that to turn a profit. Though Dolittle ended up being a misguided folly, studios understood that in general, recognizable IP combined with innovative CGI would equal cash. So aside from Disney, we're going to see the likes of a live-action How to Train Your Dragon film in the not too distant future. Who knows how it will turn out? The fact that it seems to be using real sets as much as possible is encouraging for sure.
Not likely to again.
As for The Lion King, given its immense box office haul, Disney returning to that well was always on the cards. Mufasa, The Lion King, an origin story based around the early life of Simba's dad, has been in development for years and arrives this December. With Moonlight director Barry Jenkins replacing Jon Favreau, the movie will at least be a kind of new story and not a direct remake, but the trailer seems to emit the same beautiful vacantness of the first film. It will probably be wildly successful, of course, but who knows whether it will actually offer anything original or interesting. So where does that leave us in the end? And what is that strange sensation only a bad photorealistic CGI movie can deliver? During a recent interview at the Cannes Film Festival, George Lucas answered a question about AI, but his response could be reflective of cinema's relationship with any technological advances. It's inevitable. I mean, it's like saying, I don't believe those cars are going to work. Let's stick with the horses. And yeah, you can say that, but that isn't the way the world works. And really, he's right. The forward march of technology is unstoppable. In 2001, the movie adaptation of the video game Final Fantasy, The Spirits Within, became the first photorealistic computer-generated feature film, being hailed in some quarters before release as the future of cinema. But when it was released, it was met with indifference and lost a ton of money. It took 4 years to make and didn't come close to making its hefty budget back in theatres. Slowly but surely though, the technology became integrated to the point that it ended up actually being the future. It was just that in 2001, it hadn't been in the oven quite long enough yet. When I look at these modern Lion King movies though, I feel the same uncanny valley weirdness I felt when I first saw the glass-eyed stars of Final Fantasy. They exist in a strange metaverse somewhere between animated movies and live-action ones. Something just feels off. Soulless, the nothing. They've proved incredibly financially successful for Disney though, so they're not going anywhere it seems. I mean, they're remaking the Aristocats and Bambi? In the words of Van Wilder, however, worrying is like a rocking chair. It gives you something to do, but doesn't get you anywhere. It's happening whether we like it or not. In the end, CGI overuse is an issue, but it isn't always the only issue. The 2023 film Strays, which brought back the use of real animals in a major Hollywood film for 95% of its scenes, and was referred to as an R-rated Homeward Bound by one of its voice stars, Will Ferrell, received middling reviews and failed to make its production budget back in cinemas. I thought it was okay. The script let it down somewhat, but I loved the throwback of seeing the real animals interacting on screen and thinking about the dedication it took behind the scenes to achieve it. Given the film's relative failure, and without the potential second life on video or DVD that movies like Homeward Bound had to fall back on in the 90s, it doesn't seem like a glut of talking real animal movies will follow Strays' lead. I don't think anyone could argue Strays is better than Paddington 2 for example, just because there are real dogs instead of a CGI bear. And in the glory days of live action talking animals and babies, we've seen that there were plenty of very, very bad movies being made using this process. But that process did serve up some really fantastic movies at one point too. CGI is, or at least should be, just another tool at filmmakers' disposal. But when the tool feels like it's becoming the art form itself, that is when it becomes an issue. Technology, talent, skill, patience. In cinema, they are all only as valuable as what you do with them. The story and delivery are still king, something which will never change. As Homeward Bound proved so eloquently all those years ago, if you can do it in a humane way, then utilising genuine animal stars can add heart to a story which is difficult to replicate. The technological march forward goes on, but I hope there is still a place somewhere for the kind of emotion something like Homeward Bound can achieve with a genuine on-screen bond between human and animal. When it's done well, there isn't a technical innovation in the world that can improve it.